But at the same time, it's understandable that in previous yugas, he was understood much better, to the point where in previous yugas, anywhere Narada appeared, even rishis would bow down to him, what to speak of anyone else. It was understood this was the chief of rishis, Devarshi, the rishi among the devas, among the gods. That's one of his titles. But today, in the Kali Yuga, which is the worst of all ages, it's not surprising that the best of all sages is completely unknown. And his teachings are completely unknown. Thus, it's not surprising that the Narada Bhakti Sutras is a work that is not known by many people, even people very deeply into yoga, into Vedic spirituality. At most, maybe they've heard of it. They certainly haven't read it, and they certainly haven't studied it, and they most certainly have not understood it. So this is why, when we published the Narada Bhakti Sutras, it's going to be a massive book. It's going to be as large as some translations and commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita will be. It's going to be not just everything you've heard me say in these classes, what will end up being 16 classes, but of course I'm going to expand as I write. And it's going to end up being at least a 400-page book. Commentary on 84 short verses. And it's unheard of, especially with the Narada Bhakti Sutras. But we need to establish the importance of the Narada Bhakti Sutras. Again, everyone's heard of Yoga Sutras, even some so-called yoga teachers for who they know nothing about spirituality. Yoga is just a way to get in shape. Even they've heard of the Yoga Sutras. Some people have heard of the Brahma Sutras or the Vedanta Sutras. Very few have heard of the Narada Bhakti Sutras. And it's an extremely important book. So despite people not having heard of it, we're going to put it on the map with these videos that are being done right now, but also with the commentary that I'll write on my translation of the Narada Bhakti Sutras, which will be, again, massive, at least minimal 400 pages. So this is going to put the Narada Bhakti Sutras spiritually and as far as literature on the map. So very important. So again, as I mentioned to people, we're beginning chapter 5 of the Narada Bhakti Sutras. We will not be able to finish chapter 5. As I looked at it, I realized that there's too much here, and I want to do justice to each one of these verses. So we'll try to do as much as we can, and we'll try to finally finish up with our next class, which will be the 16th class of the Narada Bhakti Sutras. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Nyena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Very good. So where we left off last time was we finished chapter 4 of the Narada Bhakti Sutras. We will now start with chapter 5. Chapter 5 starts with verse 74. And you'll see 74 and 75 go together, but we'll do one at a time. We'll do 74 first. And this is 74. The devotee should not engage in argumentative philosophical debate. Okay? That's short. That's simple. The devotee should not engage in argumentative philosophical debate. Now, this is actually an important verse, and an important verse very specifically for this year, for 2017, for the last generation or two, maybe several generations. This is a very important verse for today. The reason why Narada is saying this is because, and he'll explain in, again, the next verse that we're going to look at, but I want to explain this a little bit first before we get to Narada's explanation. what we have seen is that debate, argumentation, philosophical sort of disputation is something that, if it is to be done properly, requires what? Not a sharp mind, not merely that, not merely a good grasp of philosophy, not merely sincerity, not merely, and you can add any other word you want. What it requires more than anything is honesty. If you're going to have two individuals debating, all right, here is the proposition that we're going to debate. The proposition is, there is a being who is God, who is an omnicompetent being. That's the proposition. Now you have one person debating for that proposition, one person debating against that proposition. The idea in theory is that for a debate to be productive, you have to have two individuals who are experts, who know the field very well, who know the topic very well, who have the ability to be eloquent, and more, who will debate honestly, who won't use little semantic tricks, who won't use emotion, who won't use ad hominem attacks, that is, attacking, ridiculing the other person, rather than in a rational way trying to show the unreasonability of the actual proposition, etc. You need honesty. Unless you have two individuals who truly are attempting to know truth, and this is what I mean by honest, and willing to accept the actual proven conclusion regardless of whether it agrees with you or not. That's honesty. Unless you have two individuals who are willing to do that. That is, when they're proven wrong, they have the ability to say, yes, actually, everything that you have said is completely logical. I cannot refute it. I was wrong. You were correct. And I submit to you that you are indeed correct. Unless you have two individuals who are willing, in theory, to do this, debate is worthless. In fact, for that matter, any sort of intense philosophical discussion, argumentation, disputation of any kind is worthless. So more than anything, you don't need just two smart people. You need two honest people. Two people who are willing to, with humility, admit if they are wrong, that they are wrong. Now, today, and you need to just trust me, very few people have seen me in action. I can debate. I am a debater. I've never been defeated in debate, and I don't say that with pride. I know how to debate. I've literally studied debate and rhetoric. I don't debate. I used to, especially in the 80s, when I lived in New York. I debated with people all the time. Fierce debates. And even back then, I was a good debater. And I debated almost every day. Not quite, but almost every day. See, I was with ISKCON. So we would go out into the streets and we would have kirtan, sankirtan, and we would debate with people on the streets of Manhattan about every sort of philosophical and religious topic on earth. Now, let me ask people, logically I won the debates, but let me ask people, how many of the debates do you think I really won? In other words, how many people did I persuade? How many would you think? Pick a number.
0.
Maybe 2.5 of hundreds of debates. Why? Because people do not debate in order to know truth. They debate in order to try to show what they think they already know, and even then their motivation is ego, pride. No, this is the case, and I'm going to prove it's the case because I am invested in what I believe. What I believe is me. And if what I believe is defeated, I'm defeated, and I'm not going to be defeated. See, that's the attitude of everyone today who engages in so-called debate. And this is the thing. We're talking about the 80s. Today it's worse. Today, if you watch debates on television, political debates, on any of these news cable networks, you watch people debating the issues of the day. It's extremely disheartening that everyone just uses pure emotion and pure gotcha, 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 rather than trying to, again, in a truly philosophical, calm manner, try to come to a conclusion that reflects the truth of the situation. Nobody does that today. Nobody. Thus, debate is worthless. This is why I don't debate anymore. This is why, I've had people try to debate me. I shut them down within seconds. If I have to, and it hasn't happened, but if I had to, I would just literally walk away. The reason why is because I understand that people are not honest enough today for there to be any fruit of any sort of philosophical debate whatsoever. If your proposition is, overall, it is generally good not to kill innocent people. All right, that's my position. If there's someone who tries to debate you on that, and their position is, no, it is good to kill people, they will not give in. They will not surrender. They will use every trick in the book. You will show to them from every angle humanly conceivable how no, what you're saying is not logical, and it will not matter. Why? They are dishonest. That's it. Very simple. It's not that they even truly believe in what they're saying. They're simply dishonest. And when a person is dishonest, by definition, they are going against logic. They are going against reason. Think of a thief. A thief is dishonest. It is reasonable that if you have a society, a civilization in which you have a social construct in which you want to cultivate trust so that the individuals living in that society can have some sort of peace of mind knowing that their things are not going to be stolen, that they're not going to be abused, etc., it would make sense that I as an individual should not steal. That's logical, correct? But a thief is what? Dishonest. Thus illogical. Thus going against reason. You see? To go against reason and to be dishonest is the same thing. They are synonymous. No one has ever stated this to my knowledge. But it sounds like a bold statement, but looked at logically, it's not a bold statement. To go against reason is to be dishonest. Thus, getting back now to this verse, why are we to avoid all sorts of philosophical argumentation, etc., and specifically in the Kali Yuga and specifically today, in this era in which we are all presently living? We are to avoid all such debate because logic does not exist, because very few people are honest. And without logic, to try to have a debate without logic is like trying to take a ride in a hot air balloon without helium. Good luck. So, the devotee should not engage in argumentative philosophical debate. So we don't. We don't. We do engage in discussion. Now, having said that, I do have to say this. We do engage in discussion, especially in accordance with how honest and how open and how sincere the individual is. So in other words, we can engage in kind of, let's say, a semi-debate with individuals if we see that the person does have some honesty to them, they're just misguided, and if we do indeed show them the illogicality of their position and the logicality of our, that is the dharmic position, if we see that in doing so they will perhaps change their mind, then we can engage a little bit. But again, we engage in discussion in direct proportion to the honesty of the individual with whom we are discussing. Make sense? Very good. All right. Now let's go on to 75, which again is a continuation of this previous verse. 75. This is the case because debate of this type are inconclusive due to multifarious views. Due to multifarious views. This is how Narada explains why devotees should not engage in debate. Keep in mind, of course, Narada was speaking at a more genteel time. He wrote this many, many, many thousands of years ago, at a time when there was a lot more honesty in the world. So our issue today is different from Narada's issue. Our culture today is different from Narada's culture. Again, when Narada was writing the Narada Bhakti Sutras, this was a time in which still, in fact, I don't know if people understand, even know this, the Nyaya school, that is the school of logic, but also the protocols for debate in ancient times were rigid. Debate, the way people quote-unquote debate today on CNN, Fox, MSNBC, any of these places where you see people yelling at each other, this would have lasted for about 3 seconds before a judge would shut the debate down. The way debates were done in the past was that the two individuals debating, they had to be proven qualified individuals, meaning that they were indeed recognized as experts, top experts in their field, number one. Number two, that they have proven that they understood and could adhere to the protocols of debate. And if they didn't, their career was finished. And what does this mean? This means in debate, if you follow any rule that is not logical, that goes against logic, that is a fallacy, that is an ad hominem attack, if you do this once, you lose a debate. If while you're debating the person, you make the mistake of saying, oh, and you're wrong because, well, wasn't it the case that you said so-and-so 5 years ago and you were wrong about that, weren't you? The judge would end the debate. You've just lost because you attacked the person. That's how strict things were. So the way debates occurred in the past was, again, you had two qualified individuals who were qualified not just in their field of expertise, but qualified in that they adhered rigidly to the rules of debate. That's the first thing. Second thing, there would be judges who would be completely objective and respected by the entire academic community, and it was their job to watch over the debate, referee the debate. The other thing was this. Debates had consequences in the past. If you lost the debate, it's not just that you had the ability to then say, which you of course had to, oh, I was wrong, okay, you were correct. Of course you had to say that. But you couldn't then just say, well, bye now, and leave. If you lost the debate, you had to surrender to that person who won the debate, philosophically. In other words, if you had a Shaiva, let's say, debating a Baudhika, if you had a Shaiva, Vedic Shaivite, debating a Buddhist, and they're debating, the Buddhist loses the debate. At that point, the Buddhist must denounce Buddhism and follow Shaivism. Or vice versa. Whoever loses the debate, at that point, it's not just that you lost the debate, you have been proven wrong. You now, before this entire group of people, again, scholars, sometimes there would be hundreds of scholars watching this debate for hours, in front of your community of scholars and these judges, you lost the debate, now you must abandon your philosophical worldview. And you must surrender to the worldview of the person who won the debate. How's that? And no questions asked. No one, again, during this era that we're talking about, which is the Vedic era, there was no person who lost a debate and then said, well, all right, well, even though I lost this debate, still, no, I'm not going to stop believing what I... No. If that person did such a thing, they would be exiled from the academic community. They would no longer be a scholar. They'd go scrub a toilet. And I'm not joking. They can go scrub a toilet at that point. You lost the debate. You stood up here as an individual representing your worldview. No one forced you to, you see? No one forced you to. You came here. In your case, obviously arrogantly, because now you refuse to give in. You came here representing your worldview, your community, your school of thought. This was a fair debate. You know it was a fair debate. You lost. This entire community of scholars has seen you lose. The person who you went against won. Now you can't just say, well, despite that, no. Now you surrender to that person's worldview. There was a price to be paid if you lost the debate. Thus, this sounds intense, this sounds unforgiving, but what was the result? you didn't have a million, a billion worthless talking heads the way you do today. If you claimed, I have the truth and I know the truth, oh, you better prove it. And what does this do for society? It keeps the cheaters away from the innocent. Keeps the big mouths away from the innocent. It keeps the exploiters away from the innocent. Oh, you claim you have truth? Oh, very nice. Sit in the field of debate and let's see. You have an opportunity to not sit in the field of debate before you sit there. You have the opportunity to decline and say, no, I'm sorry, I refuse to debate. At that point, of course, you were proven to be wrong too. But it's all free will. If you're going to claim you have truth, you better prove it. Now, do you think we have such circumstances today? No. No, we do not. So, getting back to what Narada says, again, Narada was speaking in a much more genteel time where these protocols, these rules that I just explained, this was the norm. So it was not even a matter of dishonesty. So he doesn't mention this. I mention this because we're in the Kali Yuga. But let me read this one more time. So why should a devotee not engage in debates? This is the case because debates of this type are inconclusive due to multifarious views. Due to multifarious views. So in other words, what he is saying was at the time, see, this is something that's interesting and important for people to know. Regardless of the era in history that we're talking about, even yugas ago, people had differences of opinion, including even with Sanatana Dharma, including even with Vedic teachings. People had different opinions, even in the best of times, even in the beginning of the Dwapara Yuga, when people lived to be 10,000 years old, they were so advanced. They had different opinions, you had different schools of thought. Why is the question? Why is the question? All right. At some point you'll remember that we talked about something similar to this when we were talking about the Narada Bhakti Sutras. Why is it that there are different opinions? There are one of two reasons. There are different opinions upon a topic, either because conclusive truth about that topic is unattainable, or because not everyone is capable of knowing that conclusive truth. Thus, there are various opinions. So, which of these do you think applies to Sanatana Dharma?
The second one, the latter.
The latter. So, the truth of the matter is, Sanatana Dharma is one unified truth, and the entirety of the Vedic scriptures with one united voice declare that truth. However, despite that fact, regardless of the era, even during the Satya Yuga, there will be different people with different quote-unquote opinions about that one truth. Is it because there is no conclusive definition of truth? No. It's because people are on different stages. People are on different stages. Some people know that truth extremely well. For those individuals who know that truth extremely well, everything that they say is indeed synonymous with that truth in its entirety and in its ultimate purity. But then, for those individuals who know it this much, they will have a quote-unquote different opinion. Is it a different opinion, or is it a less informed opinion? Another question.
Less informed.
Less informed. All right, and then of course I can go on and on. Someone will have this much truth. Someone will have that much truth. Oh, a little bit more, but kind of over here, and on and on and on. Thus we have multifarious views. We have multifarious opinion. See, Narada here is not a relativist. He's not saying that, oh, there are multifarious opinions, that's why we shouldn't have arguments. And of course, all those multifarious opinions are correct. Did he say that? For those who don't remember, this is the case because debates of this type are inconclusive due to multifarious views. You see, he didn't say that, oh, there are multifarious views and they're all correct and we should respect them all. He's just stating a fact. You're not going to win debates because people have different opinions. And of course, why people have different opinions, well, that we know. All right. So that little unit being done, those two verses going together, 74, 75. Let's go on now to 76. Bhakti Shastra. The scriptures of devotional consciousness and Bhakti Shastra must be respected. Their teachings should be discussed, and the activities prescribed in them should be practiced. So very important. This is both an epistemological verse and a sadhana verse, both at the same time. This is a verse that is explaining that the way that we derive knowledge about truth is from not just the Shastras, but very specifically, if you look at the Sanskrit, Bhakti Shastrani, from very specifically the Bhakti Literature. And what is the Bhakti Literature? Let's talk about that first. What is the Bhakti Literature? I'm asking people this, and it's a trick question. Of all the Vedic scriptures, what is the Bhakti Shastra?
Bhagavad Gita.
Go on. Anyone else? Keep in mind, I said it was a trick question.
All of the scriptures.
There you go. That's why you're Mandaleshwari. All of the scriptures is really Bhakti Shastra. Because the truth of the matter is, if you know how to read the scriptures, Bhakti is found permeated in every single text of the Vedic corpus. Beginning from Rig Veda all the way to Bhagavad Gita and the Sutra literature and beyond. There is no scripture in which Bhakti is not mentioned. Mention a scripture, and I'll show you, if not now, give me the scripture so I can look through it and I'll show you. The Bhakti is mentioned. Thus, Rig Veda, Rig, rich. What does that word mean? That's the verb root for Rig. It means to praise. It's the Veda of praise. Praise itself is a form of bhakti. It's a form of devotion. It's a form of worship. And then many of the scriptures that people mention. Bhagavad Gita, bhakti is there all throughout Bhagavad Gita. Srimad Bhagavatam, certainly the Bhakti Sutras, meaning the two sutras, the Narada Bhakti Sutras, Shandilya Bhakti Sutras. But what about the Upanishads? What about the Upanishads? See, again, unfortunately, people have a partial understanding of the Vedic scriptures. And when people think of the Upanishads, they think purely of philosophy. Is bhakti not there also? Yeah. There are many places within the Upanishads where bhakti is mentioned. And more, the word that's mentioned very specifically is upasana. Upasana, as devotional meditation in proximity to the divine, in proximity to God. So this is mentioned also in the Upanishads. Bhakti is everywhere. Bhakti is in the Mahabharata. It's in the Ramayana. Who's one of the main figures in the Ramayana? Who do you see depicted like this all the time and offering devotion? Hanuman. Hanuman. So again, in all of the scriptures you see bhakti mentioned. So really, in one sense, when he is saying Bhakti Shastrani, the Bhakti scriptures, the scriptures of bhakti, of devotion, he means all the scriptures. But then, technically speaking, if you want to be truly technical, yes, there are some scriptures that especially are overtly devoted to devotion, including Bhagavad Gita and especially Srimad Bhagavatam. And of course, these two sutras, Narada Bhakti Sutras, Shandilya Bhakti Sutras. All right, so that's the first thing. So first of all, he explains that these scriptures, the Bhakti Shastra, must be respected. That's the first thing. Why does he say this? And in what context is he saying this? They must be respected by whom? By whom specifically? I'll give you a very big hint. What everyone in this room is.
Yogi.
Yes. Yogis, bhaktas, individuals who are on the path, individuals who want to know God. So this is who he's talking about. Such individuals must respect the bhakti literature. For what purpose? If they want to make advancement in spiritual life. All right? That's the first clause. And their teachings must be discussed. Very important. This is in contradistinction to the previous two verses. Okay? Now, in the previous two verses, what were we talking about? Debate, argumentation, etc. Now he's talking about discussion. There's a very big difference between two individuals who have radically opposed views trying to debate each other, and again, we won't go over this again. We've seen what the potential dangerous consequences could be, versus two honest, sincere, devotional individuals in satsang, in association with one another, honestly discussing the Vedic literature. What's the difference between debate versus discussing? Debating is conquering. Let there be no doubt about this, actually. Debate is conquering, it's conquest. Including if you are debating on behalf of Sanatana Dharma, you are a conqueror. This is why one of the names of Shankaracharya was Digvijaya. Digvijaya. What does that mean? Digvijaya. This is Shankaracharya, who was one of the greatest Vedantists, a scholar, a sage, etc. He didn't carry swords with him. But one of his epithets, one of his names was Digvijaya. What does that mean? No?
Victory.
Yeah, conqueror of all directions. Conqueror of all directions. How's that? That was one of the names of Shankara. Why? Because he was a debater. Because this process that I discussed before, he did this for years. He traveled the length and breadth of Bharata, of India, and he debated people, and he conquered them, and conquered them, and conquered them, without a sword, just with his mouth and with his heart. He conquered. So debate is conquering. But what is discussion? Not trying to conquer. Now you have two individuals who are associates, who are friends, who are god brothers, god sisters, etc. And in studying the scriptures, they discuss with each other. They discuss the ideas of the scriptures. They discuss their own realizations of the scriptures in order to encourage each other, in order to learn even more. Okay? So that's what this is saying, that these teachings should be discussed. And this is the most important clause. And the activities prescribed in them, in these scriptures, should be practiced. This is the most important clause of this verse. Why? This distinguishes the philosopher from the yogi. This distinguishes the academician from the experiencer. It's one thing to certainly debate, it's one thing to discuss, it's one thing to think about, to read, think about, reflect upon, contemplate the teachings of the scriptures. But more importantly than anything, those teachings have to be practiced, practiced, practiced every day, in everyday life. In this way, when the scriptures are practiced, they come alive. They come alive. And more, the individual who is practicing the teachings of the scriptures perfectly becomes a scripture, becomes a living scripture. In my book, The Vedic Way of Knowing God, I mentioned one term that almost nobody knows, and that is Pramana Bhutta. Pramana Bhutta. It's a very ancient philosophical term. And that is this, that there are many different kinds of pramanas. There are many different ways of knowing truth, of knowing something, including Shastra Pramana, that is knowing through Shastra. But there's also another phenomenon that almost nobody has written about, but that is there in the scriptures. I didn't make this up. It's called Pramana Bhutta. That is, Bhutta means a living being. a living being who is a pramana. In other words, a living being who, by observing that person, you are learning truth. Why? Because that person is the personification of truth, the personification of Scripture, in such a way that everything that they say, everything that they do, how they say, how they do, and more, what they convey as their inner essence, is actually non-different from Scripture. So watching this person, listening to this person, is the same as reading Scripture. This is one reason why, for individuals who are very close to Prabhupada, who really appreciate Prabhupada a lot, we love even seeing videos of him. Like I have this one collection of, I forget how many, multiple hours, it's at least maybe 40, 50 hours of video of Prabhupada. And toward the end of it, there are several hours in which, this was in the 60s and 70s, they didn't have the best cameras. So there's a lot of video without audio, where you just see Prabhupada doing things, but you don't hear anything. And instead, they just put some nice music in, some kirtan. And, I've watched this multiple times. There will be times where I'll just sit and I'll watch this and you can't hear Prabhupada. You just see him. You see him teaching. You see him talking to people. You see him sometimes even just walking, just doing daily things. There's one little section where you just see him putting his socks on. And I can watch this and be endlessly fascinated. And to me, I learn as much just watching him do as saying. Because he was Pramana Bhutta. He was living Scripture. Watching him is for me, is like reading Bhagavad Gita. Same thing with my Guru. Whenever I was with my Guru, sometimes, certainly he would talk a lot, but then sometimes he wouldn't. Sometimes he would just be very quiet. And sometimes he would be very still. Sometimes he would just do things. And myself and my other God brothers, God sisters, even when he was silent, we would watch him enraptured. Our eyes would not divert, at least mine wouldn't. Sometimes I would wonder to myself, have I just blinked for the last 10 minutes? I remember being in India, and things like this would happen, where he would just stop talking, and again, sometimes he would just be silent, other times he would just stop talking, but he would just kind of look around and just do little things, and I would just watch him, just watch. And I remember there were a few times when I would suddenly have this realization, have I just blinked for the last 10 minutes or haven't I? And I didn't know. That's how closely I was watching him. And why? It's inexplicable almost. It's hard to explain, actually. When a person is truth personified, every little thing that they do is quote-unquote fascinating. It's different. It's not something the origins of which are in this world. That's the only way I can explain it. But in any case, the activities prescribed in these scriptures should be practiced. They should be practiced. This is the most important thing of all. That's one thing to read these scriptures, but this is why there are so many individuals, many of who I've known, who are, for example, scholars, professors of religious studies. And they can quote you the Bhagavad Gita. They can quote you probably 100 verses from the Bhagavad Gita. They can quote you verses from the Vedas. They can probably recite the Vedas to you. But they have no faith. And they don't actually follow anything. They will sit in a bar somewhere, with their cocktail, going on and on, talking about, and the history of South India is fascinating, and going on and on like this, as they're taking their little drinks of their martini and smoking a cigar or something. They don't actually follow anything. Thus, their knowledge is worthless. See, this is the thing. It's worthless for them because they're not experiencing what it is that they're actually talking about. Imagine what a self-imposed curse this is. Just imagine this. This is an example. It's like It's like all of your life you've lived in poverty. You've come close to starving many times. You have to wear rags. And you live in a hut, a one-room hut. And all that time, all you had to do was dig into the ground about 3 feet under that hut. And there was a treasure chest with multiple millions of dollars in it. And this is especially the worst thing. At times when you're honest with yourself, even in your deepest poverty, you knew it was there. You knew it was there. But you never dug it up. You're too scared. That's the person who reads these scriptures but doesn't actually do. They know they should have. They were just too scared. Because they thought they were going to lose something worldly, like their reputation. For a professor, their reputation is everything. Right? Oh, what's happened to Professor so-and-so? He's taking this seriously now. He's gone native. All right, let's go on. We're having fun with these last verses. Let's go on though. All right, 77. In time, having patiently relinquished attachment to worldly happiness and distress, material desire, profiteering, and so forth, not even half a moment should be wasted in vain. Not even half a moment. Kshama ardha. Ardha means half. Kshama, a moment. Not even half a moment. Not half a second, half a moment. Not even that should be wasted in vain. So let's go through this first and then we'll get to that. You can see that's the gist of this, but still, let's do this in order. Within the context of time, having patiently relinquished attachment to, and now these things, sukha, dukkha, worldly happiness and distress. Worldly happiness and distress. Almost everyone in this world is attached to worldly happiness and distress. That is, they try to seek happiness, they try to avoid distress. Seek happiness, avoid distress. Now, of course, while on one level it is healthy to do that, we shouldn't seek distress. What is the point of this? Same point as the Bhagavad Gita, that at the same time we should realize that happiness and misery come of their own accord, like the winter and summer seasons. Thus, if at one moment we have quote-unquote happiness, oh yes, you know, something nice happened to me today, something good happened to me today, I got a little raise at work or something. Or the next day, oh, I slipped and broke my leg, and I'm going to have to be in a cast for six weeks or something. Happiness and distress, happiness and distress. They're going to come. They're going to happen. We cannot avoid distress, especially. We cannot avoid distress. We can win a lottery for $100 million, but we can still get ill. We can still have a relative die. We can still be miserable and not even know why. Happiness and distress will come, but what's of importance is that we are not attached to them, that we realize that when happiness is there one moment, so-called unhappiness the next moment, I am not affected. I am not affected because I'm above them all. Material desire. Material desire. What this means very specifically is gross material desire, extreme material desire. That is being a materialist, understanding or believing that the way to gain happiness and meaning in life is through material accumulation. The more I have, the happier I'll be. Again, this is one of the diseases of America in modernity, that so many people believe this. The more I have, well, of course, the more happy I'll be. Of course. How can it not be the case? They're the same. They're the same. Quantity means quality. The more I have, the more qualitatively good my life will be. Of course. And of course, people see that's not the case. People see that, yes, when you gain and gain and gain, especially initially, there's a thrill, but people see that it doesn't produce actual lasting happiness. If that were the case, then we wouldn't have so many millionaires on antidepressants, and believe me, we do. Profiteering. Profiteering. Seeing everything in our life, including things that should be pure, that is, relations with other people. as just a way to make a profit, just a means to exploit someone. You meet someone on the street, and instead of seeing this as something that should be pure, well, this seems like a nice person, well, let me make friends, and I'll have a new friend, and this is wonderful. Instead of seeing things in this pure way, oh, this is someone who seems nice, how can I get something from this fool? Profiteering. We have to relinquish this completely, this sort of an idea. Cannot be a spiritual person if this is our view of people, and so forth. So, in time, having patiently relinquished all these things, all right? So having already done this, we should come to the realization that not a moment, not even half a moment, should be wasted. Now, why is this important? We find ourselves situated in a realm in which we have several overwhelming phenomena, one of which is space, that we have the advantage or the disadvantage of geographical proximity, and I won't go into the physics of that, which I can very deeply. But we also have this thing called time, kala, time. And time is something which, again, like every other natural tool, can be used to help ourselves tremendously, or it can be used to do the opposite. It can be used to do the opposite. Time is there, you see. Time is there. We can't stop time. You can't escape time. You can't avoid time. The question is, what do you do with it? Time being there. We have the ability to live our lives in such a way that every single moment of our life, and even every single half moment, has been a waste. And we know many people who are like this. We hear about them. We ourselves, who does not know in their own lives people who you could say pretty much every second of their life was a waste? Why? Because they didn't value time, and more because they used every single fragment of time in order to harm themselves rather than help themselves. That is a waste. Instead, the devotee, the wise individual, anyone who's wise, understands that every second is precious. What is most precious? That thing which once lost can never be retrieved. That's why when our loved ones die, we mourn. We can't get them back. That thing which once lost cannot be retrieved is the thing that we understand is most precious. Time, even a split second, once lost, will never return. And how much can be done in a split second? How much can be done? Everything from nothing, in fact the opposite of nothing, harm, to the liberation of a planet can be done in a split second, and everything in between. Our own salvation can occur within a split second. Anything can occur. This is the power of time. So when we know that we have time, let's use that time wisely. Let's use every second that we have to maximize what is done for the good, what is done that is beneficial within that time. This is what Narada is asking us to do. So let's go on to 78. Such characteristics of good conduct as, and then he gives a list here, ahimsa, nonviolence, truthfulness, cleanliness, compassion, faith, and so forth, should be cultivated. So very important. He's telling us point blank that these are some of the good qualities that should be cultivated by the individual who wishes to experience devotional consciousness, bhakti. And then he says adi, he says, and so forth. He includes the word adi. Adi means several things, but also means etc. and so forth. So these are some of the characteristics that have to be cultivated. And the reason why this is important, that he includes adi, he includes so forth, is because it's important to know. The actual number of characteristics that are meant to be cultivated are almost unlimited. But this is a sutra, correct? He's trying to be terse. So he's not going to list 200,000 different attributes that should be cultivated. Instead, he just lists a few prime examples that, especially in his day, everyone just kind of intuitively knew. So let's talk about some of these very quickly. Non-violence. Non-violence, ahimsa. That's the actual exact word that's used in the Sanskrit. I just remember, even though it's not down here. Ahimsa, non-violence. And of course, what does this mean? You know, you've heard me speak about this before. Non-violence doesn't just mean that, all right, well, if I'm not punching someone in the face at this exact moment, I'm being non-violent. Because that would be easy enough. Even the most violent person, what percentage of the time are they actually violent? Are they literally punching people in the face 24 hours a day? Even the most violent person on earth, you could say most of the day is not violent. So does that count? Does that count? Oh, I'm not punching someone in the face right now, so I guess I'm practicing ahimsa. No, of course not. What is meant by nonviolence is not just what you are doing, but also within that you are nonviolent. And what does nonviolence mean? Nonviolence is equated really yogically with ego. What is violence? What is nonviolence? You see, the greatest warrior is an individual who can kill 10,000 people at once. I forget the Sanskrit. There's an actual Sanskrit term for that. A warrior who's powerful enough to kill 10,000 soldiers. I have to look it up. It's a very nice term, actually. You can have a warrior who is engaging in killing 10,000 people right now and who is nonviolent. Why? Because their ego is not involved. They are not killing because they're just full of hate, because they want to conquer, because they want to make people suffer, because they just want to take over someone's country, someone's land. In fact, on the contrary, they can actually be killing these people, and with each person they kill, in their mind, almost apologize to them as they're killing them. Such an individual is a perfect warrior. They are an individual who they are killing because they have to, because it is their duty, because they are killing for a higher purpose. They were forced to kill, like the Pandavas. They didn't want to fight. They were forced to kill. Forced, again and again and again. Half the Mahabharata shows how the Pandavas tried to have peace, tried to have peace, tried to have peace. And then finally they were forced to war. So, is that person engaging in violence? Physically they are, but inwardly they are not. Inwardly they are not. Versus an individual who is living on the proverbial deserted island somewhere, and there is no one else to kill. But inwardly they are so warped, they are so angry, they are so violent within, that if they could, they would kill people. But you see, physically they're not. Is that a violent person? Yes, that's a violent person. Violence is something within. So when we speak of ahimsa, this is what we're talking about, more of an inner state, not merely what you do. All right? So that vicious person who's very violent, who happens to not be punching someone in the face right that second, they're still violent because they're violent within, even if they're not manifesting it right that second. So, nonviolence. Truthfulness. Truthfulness. Satya. Telling the truth at all times. Telling the truth at all times. More than anything, what this means is telling truth in the highest sense. That is, conveying the truth of scriptures. More than anything. Thus, an individual who, going back to this previous verse, an individual who is a Pramana Bhutta, an individual who is personifying scripture, an individual who is so personifying scripture to the point where you can learn truth by observing that person. That is a person who is living in satya, in truth. Okay? Cleanliness. Cleanliness, purity, as well you could say, shaucha, cleanliness. This is also very, very important. This means both external cleanliness, actually. A lot of people will try to pretend that they're spiritual. I've actually known people like this. I actually knew this woman in New York in the late 70s. And she was basically a homeless person, but she was pretending to also be a yogi. And her idea of being a yogi was that she basically was a semi-homeless. She was kind of crazy, of course. She was a semi-homeless person who would never take showers, who would never take baths. And she would use the excuse, well, I'm so spiritual that, I'm not the body. Yeah. We wish right now you were not the body so we wouldn't have to smell you. No. If you are a truly spiritual person, you are clean. There's no difference to you between external and internal cleanliness. One, in fact, reflects the other. If you are externally not clean, in actuality, and purposefully so, in actuality, it means that there's something inside you that also is not clean. If inwardly you're clean, you will be fastidious in making sure that you're clean. You'll take showers every day and just make sure everything is clean. So cleanliness on every level. Compassion. This, of course, we've spoken about endlessly. Being compassionate is very crucial to being a yogi, to being a bhakta. And more, there's practiced compassion, but then there's inherent compassion. Practiced compassion means, as it says, to consciously make yourself compassionate toward others as a practice, as a sadhana. That when you find yourself in a situation where compassion is warranted, that you remind yourself, shravanam, that you remind yourself that, yes, I should be compassionate here. That's different from inherent compassion. That is, that an individual comes to the point where they cannot but be compassionate. It's not a sadhana, it's not a practice, it's a being. It's a way of being. So for an individual who is an advanced yogi, being compassionate is a way of being. It's not merely a practice. They don't have to practice doing it. They are compassionate. All right? That's our goal for compassion. And then faith. Finally, faith. How often have I spoken about faith, Shraddha, the importance thereof? Faith in the healthy sense. Faith meaning that after all these years of observing, you should know. At this point, you should know. You should know. You've observed, you've heard, now know. Even when the situation that you're dealing with is not something in which empirical verification of the fact that you should continue with what you know is there before you, still you do, still you know. Still you know. That's faith in the healthy sense. At this point you should know, and you should simply have faith. Very good. So these are the qualities that are to be cultivated. All the other 200,000 qualities I believe I mentioned as the number, they're found all throughout the other scriptures. And I'm just joking. I don't know the exact number, but there are a lot of other characteristics, other qualities that we are to cultivate. Shall we stop here? All right, why don't we stop here? I'm tempted to go on, but we'll stop here. Because I do want to leave room in case there are any questions about anything.
The verse 78 is basically what Lord Krishna in 16th chapter, Shloka 2, he describes the same qualities of a person who has to be a good being. That's the ahimsa, satyam, akrodha, tyaga, shanti, rapeshanam, daya, bhuteshu, avuluptam, swadhyaya, taparsvam. It's basically how precise Lord Krishna is in Gita. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
And I think I just happen to remember that verse.
Yeah, very good. Very, very true. Yeah, in fact, I was going to mention that, if you want to see some of the furtherance of this list, Bhagavad Gita. Yeah. In fact, there are several places where Krishna gives long lists, actually, of these different qualities. But Bhagavad Gita is definitely one of them. Patanjali, of course, to a somewhat limited degree, but he also expands on these a little bit as the yamas and niyamas. But then many, many places. Yeah. And it's always wonderfully affirming when you see how one rishi will say something and then it reminds you of, oh, didn't someone else say this in a different scripture and say pretty much the exact same thing? I've had thousands of realizations like this, and it's amazing. I'll read something and then I'll remember, oh, in a different scripture it says the exact same thing, or this confirms something that was kind of stated but not explained, and now here's the explanation. This is why these scriptures, these shastras, are amazing. They're living, and they indeed speak with one unified voice. Any individual who tries to persuade us, nefariously so, that the scriptures either, they contain contradictions, or they're at odds with each other, they're different schools of thought. Oh yes, the Narada Bhakti Sutras would probably disagree with Bhagavad Gita, and Bhagavad Gita would disagree with Patanjali. No. All the scriptures speak with one unified voice. And the only person who would say that they do not is someone who hasn't read the scriptures enough. But you read the scriptures enough and you hear one voice. That's the thing that's amazing. It's interesting. This is just kind of a personal aside. When I read the scriptures, and this has been true all my life, I can jump from one scripture to another, and I know who's speaking in that particular scripture. It'll state, this is Bhagavad Gita, obviously it's Krishna. And then, this is Garga Muni, and then this is Narada Muni, and this is Vyasa. But when I read the scripture, despite knowing the individual personalities actually speaking, I hear one voice. To me, it's always been the case. For me, it's always been that it's the voice of God, ultimately speaking. That's what makes it Shastra. That's what makes it scripture. Ultimately, it's the voice of God coming through various personalities. But any other questions, comments?
Would you say that many people who go against reason are doing it unconsciously, and so they may be dishonest, but they're unconsciously dishonest?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And now there's more illusion than there used to be, so more people are just unconsciously dishonest and going against reason.
Yes. That's the tragedy of our age, actually. It's always the case in any given era that you have on one extreme a tiny minority of individuals who are thoroughly good. Then on the other extreme of society, you have again a small, tiny number of individuals who are purely evil. But then in between, you have people who are just innocent, to one degree or another, and who are pliable. In other words, they could kind of lean one way or the other in accordance with what? Many things. In accordance with persuasion, in accordance with what their culture, their society, the media is telling them, their educational system, in accordance with many things, in accordance with their interests. So what we find today is that more than at any other time actually in human history, and I can state this emphatically, more than at any other time in human history, for many generations now, it has been the case that this innocent grouping of individuals who are the majority, their judgment has been clouded by those evil voices more than at any other time. And a lot of these people, they're innocent. What can they do if evil has an overwhelmingly enormous bullhorn with which to persuade you? Whereas good can barely raise its voice to the level of a whisper. And that's been the case. It's been the case because of many reasons. Technology has been the case for a lot of metaphysical reasons. But most people are just innocent. And even if they're dishonest, they're not 100% aware that they are dishonest, that they're being dishonest. Of course, ultimately, anyone being dishonest, if you go down deep enough, they know. But that knowing can be, covered by so many layers of external voices that, they themselves are victims. Even in their dishonesty, they're being dishonest because, this is what I've heard all my life. And even though, I've always had a gut instinct that it's wrong, still the voices are overwhelming and they'll still go along with what they know is wrong. That's what we have found today. This is why, I've stated this again and again, revolution starts from the top down. This is why, more than anything, what we have needed in our era has been leaders, because that's the only thing that can salvage such a situation. When the people themselves are enslaved and cannot free themselves, you need someone to come from an external source and free them. So we need leaders more than anything to wake people up. Wake up, literally, to wake them up. And once they're awoken, they'll be very happy. They'll be they'll feel free to the point of crying. They'll feel elated. They'll feel free for the first time. But they can't save themselves. The voices of evil are just too strong. And they're just innocent people. They're just common folk, you know. They're the good people. They're just the common stock individuals who are out there who, they would like to do the right thing, but they're doing the wrong thing because, well, all society is telling them. Even their friends who are also in illusion are telling them. Yeah. So that's why. That's why. It's up to every person in this room and people not in this room at present. Wake them up. Unless you do it, they won't wake up. They'll continue in suffering. They'll continue in illusion. Wake them up. Wake them up. Wake them up. Gently, though. If someone is sleeping very deeply, you don't want to startle them. Gently. Come on. Come on. Time to get up now. Come on, you can do it. Until they open their eyes. Gently, lovingly, you wake them up.
Isn't that one example of verse 75 regarding multifarious views is interpretations of Mahavakya, for example, Tattvamasi, people have interpreted it in different way. But that doesn't mean that whole thing is incorrect. That's what you said. Very beautiful. Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, this is one of the fallacies of logic that unfortunately has become very much overused, especially by extremely dishonest and evil people today, and that is this idea that because you have many opinions about one thing, therefore there is no answer. That's relativism. That's relativism. So atheists will use this. Well, how can there be a God? Oh, if there's a God, then which one of these religions is right? Why are there so many religions? Why are there 10,000, 100,000 religions in the world? See, that proves there's no God. Because if there was a God, there would be one religion, not 100,000 religions. So because there are so many different opinions, therefore there's no God. No, you cannot come to that conclusion. Just because there are a multiplicity of opinions about one thing does not negate the fact that there is an answer. And the example that I always use, because it's so easy, but there are many hundreds, thousands of other examples. 1 + 1 equals, all right, let's say you wander into a room where for some reason you have many people there and you say, oh everyone, I have a question. 1 + 1 equals, any answers? Yeah, 29, yeah, 259,722. Yes, -0, if that is a number. Yeah, -200. Yeah, so 1 + 1 equals a racehorse. Yeah, that's what it equals. All right, they've all given multiple answers, multiplicity of views. Does that fact of multiplicity alone negate the fact that there is an answer? The answer may be known by no one in that room. It does not negate the fact that there is an answer.
I think the Shrutis have sometimes people think have contradicted each other in different parts.
Some people have thought.
Understanding of them, not the Shrutis. Shrutis are correct.
Some people have thought that, but it's incorrect. Yeah. I can tell you, I've read. If I were to give you a list of the scriptures I've read, actually, you'd be shocked. I've read the Puranas. I've read all the Upanishads, and not just 108, but I've found over the years 222 Upanishads. I've read them all. I've read the Brahmanas. I've read everything. I've read the entirety of the 4 Vedas, the Vedic Samhitas, and they're mostly hymns. I read them anyway. There wasn't much as philosophical as the Upanishads. I've read Mahabharata. I've read the entire thing, not just summation. I've read the entire thing when I was at University of Wisconsin-Madison. They have the entire multi-volume translation of Mahabharata. I've read the entire thing from beginning to end. I've read Ramayana. I've read all the sutra literature, and I mean all of it. Every sutra that exists, philosophical Vedic sutras, I've read, including everything. Nyaya sutras, Sankhya sutras does not exist anymore, but I've read the Sankhya Karika, which is as close to the sutras as possible. I've read it. I've read everything. There's no contradiction. No contradiction. Yeah, there isn't any. Even where people try to pose contradiction, the so-called contradictions are easily reconciled if you know how. I can give many examples. Saguna, Nirguna, reconciled, easily reconciled. The Trimarga, why are there Vaishnavas, Shaivas, and Shaktas reconciled? I did an entire talk on that. Any so-called contradiction is easily reconciled and exclusively using the knowledge that is in the scriptures. That's the thing.
Yes, that's why Brahma Sutra is the one that dispels all these contradictions. Everything actually clarifies everything. So. Beautiful.
Were different schools of thought allowed to exist?
Always, yes, yeah, always, and they always did exist. Yeah. So going back as many, forget about history. Going back as many, so-called prehistory, as many yugas as you want to think of. So you can go back to Dwapara, Treta, and Satya Yuga. Even in Satya Yuga, there were different rishis who had different opinions. But the thing is, there are even levels of rishis as well. And the things that they would have different opinions on were topics that were so lofty to the point where they were beyond what we would call philosophy. So, yeah, there were always differences of opinion. But nothing radical, nothing to the point of, having fights about. Just different opinions. And if anything, it gets to the point where such differences become indeed so lofty to the point where I'll try to explain what I mean by they weren't even philosophical. They become so lofty to the point where they're reflective, these differences in views, darshana, views. They were reflective not merely in differences of philosophical thought, they were differences that were manifest from the very fact of the differentiation in svarupa of the rishi involved. In other words, they were reflections of the very personality of the rishi. Because the rishis had different personalities, that's where the so-called differences arose, not from philosophical disputation. So we're talking about the subtlest of differences that really, in a way, are differences because they're naturally so. It's like the difference between one person who has blue eyes, one person who has brown eyes. It's not a philosophical difference, it's just who you are. Yeah. So, maybe one more question.
Can I ask a two-part question?
Yes.
Okay.
You can ask 2 half questions.
Okay.
Ardha prashna, half question, 2 half questions you can ask.
So earlier you said that when they lost in a debate back then, that person would submit to the winning debater's school of thought. So did also everyone who followed the loser's way of thinking also submit to the winning debater?
That person's disciples also, yes. Yeah.
And then was that the case because people back then were more committed, I guess, to following Dharma?
That's exactly why. Yeah, that's exactly why. So they followed Satya, they followed truth. Wherever truth is manifest, including in a debate, you go there if you're an honest person. It's because that was the guru principle also. You follow your guru even to the point where if your guru says to you, you know what, everything I've taught you for the last whatever many years, well, this person, you witnessed it. He just defeated me and he just showed I was wrong. Now I am going to follow this person's philosophy. You all have to as well. You did it. There was no, well, I guess so. No, I'm not going to follow this guru anymore. And the guy was just a cult leader, I guess. No. You also follow what the guru does. If anything, it shows the honesty of that guru. That if they have the ability to say, well, you know what, I've just been defeated in debate, I've been shown, and you witnessed it, that everything that I've taught has been wrong, and now I'm going to submit, well, how can you not follow that guru? That's an honest person. That's an honest person. Yeah. So what was the second half?
That was the second half.
Okay. Yeah.
Actually, that's one reason Acharya Shankara defeated all Buddhist philosophers just because of debate, and he saved Sanatana Dharma. It was being taken over by Buddhism, but he's the one who debated and defeated.
Yeah, a lot of people are not aware of this historically, that for several hundred years, not among the common people, but among the elite, meaning the Brahmanas, many of the Kshatriyas, many of the rulers of Indian society, they were following Buddhism. For several hundred years, actually, they were following Buddhism, since after Ashoka and previous to Shankaracharya, to the point where Vedic spirituality was receding. So we know, for example, that to this day, you can go to places all over India and you find Buddhist monasteries and temples everywhere that are massive and beautiful, beautiful architecture, etc. Except up until recently, now you have Buddhists in India, but let's say up until like maybe 70, 80 years ago, you would find all this ancient architecture of Buddhism, but in the length and breadth of India, there wasn't one Buddhist. What happened to them all? They weren't forced out. They weren't, it's not that, someone built a wall, keep the Buddhists out. No, what happened? Very simple. Shankaracharya happened. He traveled the length and breadth of India, and he said, all right, I'm going to defeat Buddhism. And what did he do? He challenged every Buddhist leader who had, each of who had thousands and thousands of disciples. And when we say disciples, we're talking about Buddhist monks. He would go to the top. Again, revolutions start from the top, not the bottom. He would hear, okay, in such and such city, there's this one Buddhist Acharya who has 10,000 monk disciples. All right, I will go there. I will challenge him. So and so, sir, venerable Buddhist Acharya, I am here to defend Sanatana Dharma. I would like to challenge you to a public debate in the public square of this city. The person would have no choice but to say yes, they wanted to defend Buddhism, and effortlessly he would defeat them. There you go, 10,000 Buddhist monks now following Sanatana Dharma. He would go to another city. Oh, here's another person, he's got 5,000 disciples. Same thing. Here's another person, he's got 50,000 disciples. Same thing, and on, to the point where every single Buddhist leader and their disciples who was brave enough to accept the challenge of Shankaracharya to debate, every single one was defeated. Buddhism ceased to exist in India. How's that for Digvijaya, conqueror of all directions? That was Shankaracharya. Amazing.
Could it be that Buddhism became rampant because Buddhists kind of took away the very God concept, and it was easier for people to understand than Sanatana Dharma bringing manifestation of God? Was it too complex for them to understand? I've always questioned, why did it spread?
Yeah, actually that's one reason. Yes, one reason is that Buddhism is simpler than Sanatana Dharma. It is simpler for people to understand. It's even simpler to practice, actually. Buddhism is I've called it bare bones yoga, bare bones Sanatana Dharma. In other words, what the Buddha did very purposefully was he took just a bare bones, very simplified, core essential understanding of the teaching specifically of the Upanishads. He eliminated God. He didn't eliminate God. He wasn't an atheist, but he didn't talk about God. He didn't talk about the Vedic scriptures. He made it very simple. We're suffering. We don't want to suffer. Why do we suffer? We have desire. We must eliminate desire. Here's the path to eliminate desire. That's simple. So of course, yes, the more simple something is, the more widespread among the masses it becomes. But then also a deeper reason why Buddhism spread in India specifically was because of the corruption of the two higher castes. The Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas became corrupted. The Brahmanas became corrupted intellectually, and the Kshatriyas saw Buddhism, at least initially, as a way of expanding their influence. See, I know that in the history of modern India, Ashoka is seen as a good guy. He's not. He's a villain in history, actually. He wanted to expand his personal influence throughout the world, and he saw Buddhism rather than physical military conquest as a way of doing it. He also perverted Buddhism itself and perverted it from a theistic system to a semi-atheistic system. I talk about this many places very in depth, but this is why, even at the height of Buddhism in India, it was mostly the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas following it. The common people had simple but powerful faith. They weren't scholars, they weren't powerful people, but it's actually, interestingly, the Vaishyas, the Shudras, the farmers, the simple people who actually held on to Sanatana Dharma when the upper echelons abandoned it for Buddhism and Jainism. Buddhism and Jainism. That's another thing. People don't understand how powerful Jainism once was in the history of India, to the point where major kingdoms in South India were Jaina. Yeah, look it up. Look up the history of Jainism. Major kingdoms in South India specifically were following Jainism. It was a massive religion, but they were defeated too, historically.